Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this episode, we talked to Thomas Hansen about Sephia Mail. Thomas is the creator of Sephia Mail and has been creating software since he was 8 years old, at which time he found a bunch of computer magazines, a reference book, and an Oric 1 with 48k of RAM. Occasionally, his code unintentionally does less harm than good. Now, welcome to The Cynical Developer, Thomas.
Thank you, James. It's awesome to be here. How's it going, man?
Yeah, it's not going too badly. It's good to have you on. Someone again, not from the UK, and not from the United States. So it's good to get an international feel on the show.
Thanks. I'm actually from Norway, but I used to live in California for 3 years. So I guess that's where the accent comes from.
Right.
So,
yeah. When we were talking before we recorded, the accent was sort of throwing me a little bit because I was sat here thinking, you sound very much like the guys that are on the TV show Vikings. I don't know if you know of that. And you sound very much like the guy that plays a character called Floki. And I thought it doesn't sound like a Cypriot accent, but that explains it.
No. I'm totally not from Cyprus. So I just so happen to live here at the moment.
Sure.
So what can I say? They have better tax rules.
Yeah. So you started out with an Oric 1 48k. That's the bigger machine of the two, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I can't really remember because, I was so young back then. I wasn't really into it. So my mom bought me like a computer. We were living in the boonies and I didn't have a lot of friends.
Yeah.
And so she bought me this computer when I was like 8.5 years. And it was used and came with a bunch of magazines. So now normally kids, when they get computers, they start playing games and stuff like that. I never really did that much. I realized, golly gosh, I can make this thing do whatever I want it to do. And at that point, it was just a revelation. It was like a blank canvas to me. So, and I've literally been coding since, and I'm 42 now. So, yeah, that's a lot of coding.
Yeah. The Oric, I think, came out in 83, I think. It came out the year I was born, and I was a Commodore 64 child, which they came out, I think, the year before I was born. But yeah, I remember having that, and I did just play games on it for a long time. And then I'd pick up books with code in, and you'd sit there and copy the code out, and it'd take you days and days to copy this book into a program. You'd run it, and it'd be awful.
Yeah.
And I never really knew what was going on and what I was doing back then either.
Back then the world was so easy. You only had one language, right? You had BASIC.
Yeah.
Sure, you could do machine code and stuff like that. But for all practical concerns, when you were a kid back in the days in the early 80s, you had one programming language, right? Which was BASIC. You could write 3-liners and you could make it do stuff. Today, you have to go through like compilation process. You have to figure out some IDE to use, out of which, of course, there exists billions.
Yeah. Spoiled for choice now.
Yeah, so I actually I was actually listening to some of your podcasts, preparing for this one. And there was this guy telling me that, today to learn how to be a great coder, we have so much resources, YouTube, blogs, internet, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but it's still more difficult. For an 8-year-old kid today to sit down with a computer and start creating code is probably an order of a magnitude more complex than it was for me back in the days when I was a kid. I kind of pity the kids today because they have such a much larger, problem to grasp. So I don't know if you agree with me, but...
Yeah, I definitely do. I did do an episode on getting into development and stuff, and it is something that I stumbled on. It was very hard for me to say, go out and look at this language or go out and look at that language. And I'm slightly biased because I'm a .NET developer by day, so I've sort of pushed everything to say, go and do .NET. But it's not always the best tool for the job. You might want to use Python for something, or Java, or even down to C++ or even C, something like that. It all really depends what you're trying to achieve. And then you get a lot of these people now that come across as developers. And a few years ago, if they just wrote in this one language, you wouldn't have called them a developer. They would have been a web designer, and it's JavaScript. And JavaScript now, because of everything that's out there, can do quite a lot. But a few years back, it was just what you use to have validation on your website or do some funky animations and things. So things are getting so complicated.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years. I remember when JavaScript was a toy language. Yeah, I mean, arguably it never was really, because we weren't really utilizing it, or it was too difficult to utilize because of browser incompatibilities, etc., etc. But I mean, yeah, you wouldn't call a JavaScript developer a developer 10 years ago.
No, definitely not. It was just another tool you had in your belt, like CSS and being able to write HTML and things like that. Yeah.
By the way, the actual topic for this podcast, which is Sephia 5 or Sephia Mail, you can call it whatever you wish, I guess. It's actually written in .NET, by the way.
Oh, right, okay. Well, that's good. But
it's written in .NET in a really interesting way.
Right.
Because I've actually created my own programming language on top of C#.NET, which is called Hyperlambda, which actually ties into .NET, allowing you to have an orchestration programming language which is significantly more simple to create relatively complex things in, on top of C# syncs that goes into C# and Common Language Runtime, and thus.
Oh, right, okay. So is it classed as a full language, or is it a scripting language?
Actually, that's a very interesting question. You see, I mean, traditionally, you'd categorize programming languages into either interpreted languages or compiled languages. Funny thing is, Hyperlambda is neither. I know that sounds really ridiculous, but actually, at its core, it's actually just a file format, like JSON or XML or HTML or whatever. However, it has the capacity to describe what I like to refer to as execution trees, which in the end is actually what your CPU is executing as it branches through your code. When you create an if sentence in C#, for instance, then you create a branch that conditionally branches to one or two or more possible options, depending upon some condition in your memory, right?
Sure.
So arguably, if you can create an execution tree, you can actually create a Turing complete programming environment, which allows you to do anything that C# or JavaScript or C++ in theory allows you to do. And this tree structure is actually quite easily described using Hyperlambda.
Right. Okay. So does it transpile into C#, or does it just compile down into the CLR?
Well, actually neither. It doesn't neither compile or interpret. So it takes the tree structure, which is described in Hyperlambda, which basically is a better XML or a better JSON, arguably.
Yeah. Okay.
And then when it has this tree structure, then every single keyword, quote unquote, in Hyperlambda is actually a method reference into a pre-existing C# method. And these methods have names such as if, else, while, for each, etc.
Right. Yeah, it does explain something. I had a quick look at it in the repository, and I saw the file extensions, and I was like, I don't know what this language is, so I'm going to have to ask about that. You've jumped the shark a little bit and already covered that, which is good. And I think that's really interesting that this product, not only does it take a better look on mail clients, but you've also built it with your own programming language as well.
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, I am extremely enthused about cryptography. I think developers should be creating encrypted software way more than they do. But I mean, in the end, actually, Sephia 5 is kind of like a use case for Hyperlambda, arguably, you might say. So even though it's an actual product, which I want to maintain and, bring up to really, really good standards
Yeah.
where it could be an enterprise, solution for like everyone. At the end of the day, my 50% of my motivation for starting out with it was to have a use case for Hyperlambda,
Sure.
which is the programming language which I've created on top of this active event design pattern.
Yeah, it's always good to have that little project that helps you drive the learning ability and the development of something else, rather than sort of sitting there and going, right, well, I'm going to create this programming language, and I'm just going to create it and see what happens. But if you've got something that you're going to create and actually use it for, then that it sort of proves the point of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I guess so. And that's why, I mean, it might sound ridiculous when I tell people I spent 5 days on this, but actually, literally, I did.
Yeah.
Now, of course, at that point, when I started creating Sephia 5, of course, I already had active event hooks or methods in C#, which were built on top of Bouncy Castle and MineKit and MailKit, etc., which allowed me to send emails encrypted, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, okay, arguably it's possible to claim that it is an exaggeration, which it, at some level, arguably might possibly be. However, at another level, it's actually not, because what I started out with was roughly an extremely thin layer on top of MineKit, MailKit, Bouncy Castle for cryptography, .NET, C#, etc. And then I created every single part of Sephia 5 on top of that.
Okay, so we sort of alluded to it. We've started talking about what Sephia is and Sephia 5. So just to make it plainly clear to the listener, what is Sephia 5 or Sephia Mail, and why did you develop it?
Yeah. Sephia 5 is basically a Gmail clone. It's much simpler, and it will never be as complex as Gmail for reasons which I love this analogy. And I told you this story before, but I have to repeat it. So these guys, they were subcontractors to Apple, and they were going to build this CD burning software for Apple. And they had an appointment with Steve Jobs. I mean, they're gods. They were so nervous, They wanted to have everything right. So they spent like 3 months before the appointment creating a monstrous design with all the buttons and toolbars and widgets and things you can possibly imagine. I mean, next to dancing bears over the screen, they had it all. And so the meeting comes with Steve Jobs, and they bring their lorry of documentation and design plans to the meeting. Now, Steve Jobs enters the room, doesn't even present himself. He says, "Hi, guys," goes over to the whiteboard, draws a rectangle. Then he says, "This is the software." Inside of that rectangle, he draws a green button. And then he writes the word "burn" on that button. And then he says, "There's your software. Go create it. Good luck. Thank you for coming. Have a nice day." Then he leaves the room.
Yeah, making that software as simple as possible.
Exactly. KISS. Keep it simple and stupid.
Yep.
Unless your grandma can use it, it's useless.
Yeah, definitely. And I had a similar thing where I produced some software for a touchscreen kiosk that printed credit cards, and I showed it to the other half, and she looked at it and said, "Oh, is that it?" Because I made the UI very simple. It was touchscreen, so it was a few big buttons that you clicked, and it had a keyboard that came up, and you typed in your details, and then it would do some verification. It would print a credit card, and she just wasn't blown away by how brilliant the back end of it was. It was more of, it looks simple, so it must have been simple. But I think that's definitely a key point there.
Well, that's a solution. What you created is a solution. I don't mean to be rude to any particular big blue chip companies here, but there's this guy called Jesse James Garrett, who actually coined the term Ajax. back in 2005, and he was the one who also coined the term UX, user experience, apparently.
Right.
And he's got this slideshow, which I just adore, where he's turned on every single toolbar of, I think it's Microsoft Office Word. And there's just no room left on his computer screen.
Yeah.
And then he just pauses for like 5 seconds. And then he says, that's not a solution. That's a problem. You know, that's basically the vendors of this software telling their customers, sorry, we couldn't solve your problem. But hey, you try.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. There's a few other applications like that. I suppose Visual Studio is similar to that in one way. There's a lot of bells and whistles, and for someone that isn't used to the software, it is very daunting because of all those buttons and things. And another one that always pops to mind with UIs like that was 3D Studio Max. That was just menu upon dialogue upon pop-up to get anything done. But now we're coming the complete opposite. If you look at the likes of Visual Studio Code, where you get your text editor and everything is a shortcut, key press and things to actually get anything done.
Actually, Visual Studio for Mac OS X I just freaking love it. I mean, it has like 2% of the features of Visual Studio for Windows. Yeah. But it used to be called Xamarin, and then Microsoft bought Xamarin, and Miguel de Casa started Mono and Xamarin, and I guess all .NET developers knows at least partially the story. Mm-hmm. A lot of developers will have a look at Xamarin and says that's ridiculous. And I've been using Visual Studio most of my life. I just freaking adore it. Xamarin, or what's now commonly referred to as Visual Studio for Mac, is actually one of my primary reasons for not going back to Windows. So I just love that thing, simply because it has one button. There's a play button. You click that button, it starts debugging your app. There's no toolbars. There's nothing, literally. Yeah. So, and it makes it so much easier. And really, if you have a solution that is so complex that you need all the bells and whistles from Visual Studio, maybe you should reconsider your solution. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, It's it sort of ties in a little bit with a conversation I had with some of the developers that I work with. We were talking about the different versions that we have installed of Visual Studio. And I don't mean like 2002 and 2012 and all that, but I've got the Enterprise Edition installed, which has got all the bells and whistles and everything in there, and I probably use maybe 2% of it. And I know other people on my team who are working on the same code, working on the same projects, doing the same things as I am, and they're using the Community Edition because they don't use all the other features that are available in Enterprise. Yeah. And now it's I suppose it comes down to just knowing what you need to use and knowing what you don't need. And I suppose if I did install the Community Edition rather than the Enterprise Edition, I could probably get away with it, and I'd be good. Especially since I use ReSharper, and that gives me a lot of the features that are there in Visual Studio. That's a crucial point. I mean, you solve 80% of your customers' needs, and then you facilitate for plugins, right? Yeah. At which point you, first of all, create the possibility of having an ecosystem and a community of others contributing to your software, which, of course, is good because then all of a sudden you're no longer a software vendor, but actually a platform vendor. Secondly, the normal average Joe 80% user who doesn't care about all the bells and whistles doesn't have to pay for them. And by paying, I mean like visually artifacts, toolbars, noise, loading it up, etc., etc. So that's a crucial point. I mean, I love the plugin ID, actually. And Sephia 5 is actually built like that. Every single button, every single action, every single thing that literally exists in Sephia can easily be added to and extended to by simply creating a simple Hyperlambda file, which then injects itself in that toolbar or
that page or that thing or whatever, facilitating for people to create their own plugins.
Cool. That's really nice. That. And you said earlier that it took you 5 days to build. Was that 5 days, 8 hours straight each day, or just a few hours each day?
Yeah, actually. One of the days, we had visitors for a couple of days. One of them, we were celebrating the birthday to my friend's daughter. Went out to a bar for like 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
The other day, we went to the beach. Then we went to visit. We were invited to the local Mormons church to play frisbee, etc., etc. So literally, that was 8-hour day, 5 days. And you can actually follow the code in GitHub too, and actually confirm it. Obviously, that was a first initial beta release.
Yeah.
I'm not going to exaggerate it. It wasn't really useful after 5 days, but still it proves the point. It illustrates the point, which is that with Hyperlambda, all of a sudden you have an extreme incremental growth of productivity.
Yeah.
So, and another really interesting thing too, in fact, if you profile it, the initial page load of Google for Gmail for desktop is actually 4.4 megabytes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So if you empty your cache and you inspect what goes over the wire and you do a reload of your Gmail inbox, that's 4.4 megabytes.
Yeah, that's a lot just for the UI, isn't it?
Yeah. You do the same thing with Sephia. You'll notice, I think it is down to 40K now or something. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember the exact results. But there are 2 orders of magnitude differences in bandwidth load on general, which means that Gmail spends actually 100 times as much bandwidth as Sephia 5.
Yeah, so, I think it's something that gets overlooked a lot now, is that we assume that everybody has super fast internet access. With great download speeds, and it's not always the case. I remember not that long ago spending hours minifying JavaScript files and HTML files and libraries that we were putting together for applications, just so that it was quicker for the user to download. And now it's, well, we don't care. We've got images that show up as background images, and they're 10, 20 meg. And
do you want to take
okay?
Do you want to take a guess at how much JavaScript there's in Sephia 5?
Ooh.
Try to make your most ridiculous guess you could. Just like try to say something you don't even believe in.
I don't know, 30 lines of JavaScript.
3.3 kilobytes. jQuery, minified, and zip is 25 kilobytes.
Flipping it. So, yeah. And that's the framework.
Yeah. And that's the framework. That's an entire JavaScript framework in 3.3 kilobytes, where you can do absolutely everything you could possibly dream about in regards to Ajax. Yeah. But I've been studying Ajax. Ajax is my thing. There's a reason why I call myself Ajax Galactical Guru on my Twitter account. And, I've been doing Ajax since 1998. Professionally, I've had Ajax companies since autumn 2005.
Right.
I've been exclusively researching Ajax and, trying to get it done. And it doesn't really sound that important today because, as you say, I'm on a 50 megabit connection. Who cares, really, if it's 4.4 megabytes or 40 kilobytes? Well, I'm not at home all the time. I might be up in some mountains, like 5 kilometers away from my closest base station, which implies every TCP packet has to be sent 10 times before it successfully hits the wire, etc.
Sure.
Yeah, or I might be in Africa, or I might be in some Indian village, using like some cell phone from like the 20th century, etc.
Yeah. And there just isn't that capability there. But if you're talking a few K for your UI and your application, that it's just there more or less instantly for people to use. They're not timing out just trying to download the interface.
Yeah. So I think there's way too little emphasis on these things. As we started out with, the brilliant software, like your kiosk software, is brilliant because it is simple, because it is easily grasped, easily understood. You don't need a manual.
Yeah.
You don't need to read texts. The buttons guides you, and so on and so on. And that's brilliant software.
Yeah.
And the same is true with our code. The same is true with bandwidth pollution. The same is true with behind-the-scenes architecture, etc., etc. So I think that the same metrics we measure UX accordingly to should be used to also measure code quality and bandwidth usage, etc. So.
Yeah, it's stripping everything back to the basics, and I guess that's what your claim that that Sephia Mail is better than Gmail comes down to, is the fact that it's simpler, it's smaller for the user to download, and that makes it better. And you mentioned that you were into cryptography, so is it more secure than Gmail as well?
Oh yeah, it features PGP cryptography in its current version. You can even create your own PGP key pairs from internally within Sephia. You still need GNU PG, GNU Privacy Guard installed on the server where you install Sephia 5. But that's a no-brainer on Linux, on a Linux web server, or for that matter, Mac OS X and Windows 2.
Yeah.
So, and then it allows you, the first time you log in, it guides you through a wizard where you choose your SMTP, POP3 account. It's not a POP3 and SMTP server, for the record. You still need those things. Then it asks you to create a cryptography key pair, PGP, which it does completely behind the scenes automatically for you. When you're done, you can start sending, and you've already published your key to the Ubuntu key server. Other people can download it and start sending you encrypted emails. So it features all of these things in like a wizard-like environment, which allows you to very rapidly use cryptography and PGP cryptography without really knowing anything about it. So you don't have to teach yourself tons of stuff about how public key cryptography works, yada yada. I mean, you just click next, for 2 minutes, and then you can start using it.
Yeah. So your keep it simple, stupid, has gone all the way through to actual setup and configuration of the project as well once it's installed on your server.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, simple by name and simple by nature. So it's an open source project as well, and that's available on GitHub. We'll include a link in the show notes to it. Do you have a community around it that are working on the project, or is it just you? Are you looking for people to come on and help you with it?
Well, I'm actually, Sephia 5 is pretty immature. It's only been out there for some few weeks. I'm starting to build a community on Hyperlambda, or Phosphorus 5, which it's called, which is like the quote-unquote operating system that Sephia 5, or programming language that Sephia 5 is created in.
Okay.
And that thing has started to take off a little bit. I mean, I had an MSDN article a couple of months ago about the active event design patterns. There's a new one coming out about Hyperlambda, and I think it's a month from now. I'm not entirely sure. Okay. And so that thing's starting to picking up a little bit. Sephia is probably, arguably, at the current time being, maybe a little bit too immature to having really gathered a big community. But I am definitely looking for people who wants to contribute. I'm looking for, hopefully, too, some commercial sponsors that, say, you know what, this is a great idea. We need it for a company. We have 30,000 employees. We'll pay you money to maintain it. It's open source.
Yeah.
That'd be like a dream scenario.
That'd be nice. Be nice.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So, but it's a fresh project. I admit that. And even though you can use it today, it's not done. But I mean, no software really ever gets done, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So, but I still haven't brought it to a 1.0 release.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to admit that.
Well, everything's got to start somewhere, hasn't it?
Everything has to start somewhere. So, and I'm an advocate of cryptography. I'm an advocate of privacy. I'm an advocate of all of those things. I think this is a really great solution. You know, a lot of people are obsessed with end-to-end cryptography, which implies you need to have your private PGP keys on your clients. Well, what's your client? Your client is your cell phone, right? Mm-hmm. For 90% of the time. Well, you go to a restaurant, you leave your cell phone at the table while you go to the toilet. Whoops, your private PGP key just got stolen by KGB or Stasi or NSA or something.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's much easier to actually protect your private PGP keys on a server. You know, a server you can actually protect. You can have it in a mountain hall, or if you're really paranoid, you can even have an armed guard protecting your server, you know?
Yeah.
Well, you have those scenarios. You have embassies. You have, diplomatic channels. You have, I betcha, there's a lot of armed guards outside of NSA's private key servers, So,
sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it's something to think about. So maybe you have to get one of them to stand outside my office door, stop the other half at least coming in and peering over my shoulder to see what I'm doing. We talked before that there was a prerequisite for getting Sephia 5 up and running, which was the GNU gateway. Were there any other prerequisites that we need?
Well, you need to, at the time being, I'm coming out with a new release of both Sephia and Phosphorus before my MSDN article about Hyperlambda. And at the time being, you need to have a beta version of Phosphorus 5, which, because of the PGP and MIME features that Sephia relies on, then you need to download the latest version of Sephia. You need to have MySQL, and because it stores its data in a MySQL database. And then you need to have GNU Privacy Guard, which for instance, for Mac OS X implies, what's the name of this thing? Open. Well, there's this GNU PG client for Mac OS X and Windows 2. I think it's like called Open GPG GPG Keychain. That's its name.
Okay.
GPG Keychain for a Mac. On Linux, it's called GNU PG. On Windows, I suspect also it's called GNU PG. So, but that's just a private database for your PGP key pairs.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah, and everything's open source. None of this is proprietary software.
Right.
So
there's no cost involved in getting that up and running for third party libraries that they're using.
No, nothing. And it's actually quite easy. I mean, if you can install MySQL, you can install Sephia.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, cool. So this at the moment, I know it's in very early stages, and I could have this running on my own server for my mail requirements. But is this something that you see being suitable for businesses to run and have it on their servers and use it as their primary mail client?
Definitely. And the reason why is because of this end-to-end cryptography issue. Because a business, like for instance, Statoil or Boeing or whatever, they're obsessed with not having their stuff stolen, right?
Yeah.
And, they're victims of industry, espionage, etc., etc. So I'd argue that if they have the private PGP key pairs on the server inside of their building, I mean, some of these companies have hundreds of thousands of employees, and they actually have armed guards outside of their server rooms. I'd argue that for these people to have some of their secrets stolen by some of their competitors would be significantly less probable if they have their private keepers on their servers, simply because their CEO is out on town having a few beers too much. All of a sudden, his cell phone's gone, right? Mm-hmm. At which point some adversary has access to his private PGP key.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is a disaster for a huge company like, Boeing or Airbus or, whatever. So I'd definitely say so. However, it's not mature enough. And I will maintain it at whatever time schedule I can afford, of course. But I mean, it has a limit to what I can do for free.
Oh,
so,
definitely.
Yeah. So, I mean, I cannot simply, because I have to have bread and butter and stuff, so I cannot simply commit, 40 hours a week to this.
Sure.
So, but I do still have an extremely large interest in making this a really, really good system. And not only for commercial and financial reasons, but also because I happen to be cryptography advocate.
Yeah, you got a passion for what it does and what it's advocating. So it's always nice to work on something like that, and it does help when you've got an interest in it. Because if your heart's not in a project, it's very easy to start it and then lose that interest, and the project just sort of falls to one side. It's definitely something that I've suffered with in the past, where you get shiny object syndrome. You start working on something, you lose interest, and you move on to the next thing. But if you really enjoy what you're doing with the project, it keeps bringing you back to it and working on it and pushing it forward and making it better.
Exactly. I mean, everybody used to say this: you should find the scratch or the itch you have yourself. Mm-hmm. If you can scratch your own itch, success is inevitable.
Yeah.
So you ask any top 10 NASDAQ founder like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, whatever, they'll say the exact same thing. Create what you want yourself. So, and I really want Sephia 5.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I think we're just about out of time. I've really enjoyed the conversation today, and there's a lot of new things been spoken about, or at least new to me. Hopefully new to the listeners as well, and they can go and check it out. I'll put links to the repositories in the show notes and some details on how you can contact Thomas about his project. And I'd like to thank Thomas for coming on, and I think maybe we should get you on again in the future to check up on where Sephia has got to and what it's evolved into. I think that'd be quite interesting to see how this project pans out for you.
That would be awesome, and thank you very much for having me, James. I really enjoy your shows. Thank you. It's been nice talking to you.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you, and thanks for the good comments and that. And it's nice to get somebody on who has built a project and has that passion to come and talk to me about it as well. So yeah, we'll definitely look to get you on in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, not a problem. So thank you for listening to Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Thomas Hansen talking about Sephia Mail. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform and help the Cynical Developer to grow by increasing its audience. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website, where you can find all the resource links and show notes for each episode.